your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, thanks for joining us for a look back at Alberta this week. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith announced her plans to invoke the government's Sovereignty Act on Monday over federal clean energy regulations. Smith spoke to reporters in advance of a motion that was tabled in the legislature later that day. Smith says she wants to introduce the Sovereignty Act to protect Alberta from the federal government's proposed 2035 net zero electricity grid regulations and instead have its own timeline of 2050.
The Constitution is clear. Electricity is a provincial responsibility. The federal government would do well to remember that. They have already lost two recent court battles in which their overreach into provincial jurisdiction was struck down by the courts. Ottawa's approach is also at odds with reality. Although Alberta leads the country in renewable investment, we still cannot use it for the majority of our electricity needs. For Albertans to have electricity they can count on, our province needs more baseload power from natural gas.
The act, which allows the province to reject federal laws or regulations when it thinks harm is caused to Alberta, was passed by the UCP government last year. Meanwhile, Alberta's opposition NDP leader Rachel Notley issued a statement in response saying, quote, "The UCP is invoking a dishonest and illegal stunt that jeopardizes investment certainty, breaches treaty rights across the country, weakens national unity, and embarrasses Albertans on the global stage. Energy experts, investors, and forward-looking Albertans all believe we can and should achieve net zero much sooner than 2050, which would attract billions in investment and create thousands of jobs." Notley goes on to say this is a distraction from Albertans' priorities. It's incompetent and backward and does nothing to secure Alberta's economic future, end quote. So how will the Sovereignty Act actually work in this case? And could the federal government turn around and sue the province over it? Well, Alberta's Affordability and Utilities Minister Nathan Neudorf explains.
The free market generators in Alberta would be faced with either huge costs and passing that on to the ratepayer or just walking away. That's why we had to bring forward the Sovereignty Act to protect them, to say, no, we need you to generate electricity for the safety of our community, for the cost that our ratepayers have to pay. We must, as the government of Alberta, protect our constituents. And the federal government needs to know our resolve to be able to do this so that when we continue to sit down with them and talk things through, they actually take us seriously and listen to what we're saying instead of just endless platitudes and patting us on the head. The Minister, Stephen Guilbeault, said today that they have no desire to pursue a legal path. They've said different things like that before, and that would be great. That would save all of us a lot of time and money, particularly the taxpayer. But it's better to put the ball in the federal government's court to realize that if they want things to change, they either have to negotiate with us or they have to take us to court.
On a separate topic, in a press conference held later in the week, opposition leader Rachel Notley said she has reviewed the province's legislation for Bill 2, which is the Alberta Pension Protection Act. She says after doing so, she was shocked to learn the bill does none of the things the United Conservative Party is claiming that it does.
If Bill 2 passes in its current form, the UCP could hold a referendum, lose it badly, and still happily proceed on ahead with an Alberta pension plan. And it would not contravene this proposed legislation. The bill also fails to stop the provincial government from giving that all-important notice to the federal government that they want to leave the CPP before a referendum is held.
The Alberta's NDP is also demanding accountability from the province for oil sand leaks in northern Alberta. Jody Kellehu Stonehouse, who is the Alberta NDP critic for environment, parks, and climate resilience, says several incidents have occurred over the past 18 months at the Curl site.
During some of these incidents, laws were broken, consultation with First Nations did not occur, and repeated attempts were made to downplay the severity of what has happened. Look at the leak from the Curl Oil Sands facility on November 13th, the third from that exact facility this year. A total of 670,000 litres were released into the river. That, in the sediment, it was 4 times the legal limit.
Callahoo Stonehouse says that in none of the incidents did MLAs contact the people about the leaks or keep them updated, including Minister of Energy and Minerals Brian Jean, who in a November 15th post on X said he toured the Kearl oil sands site and described the company's commitment to environmental protection as, quote, top notch. After the break, we tell you how nurse practitioners are helping tackle that doctor shortage in the province. Welcome back. Well, it's no secret there have been big problems with Alberta's healthcare system, particularly with a lack of doctors and talk of privatization. The province has now launched a survey about its healthcare and is looking to expand opportunities for nurse practitioners instead of doctors to help with that growing need. Up next, BCN's Hal Roberts gets the lowdown from the legislative correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson.
Now, the province has also launched another survey, but this one has nothing to do with the potential Alberta pension plan. This one is about the potential of reorganizing our healthcare system. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, the government, this government, Kenny's government too, they loved their public consultations and their public surveys. So the government announced this AHS reform a couple weeks ago, and it's frankly really confusing. I don't know if anyone has fully sort of wrapped their head around it about what it'll actually mean, but the basic version of it is it's going to break AHS into sort of 4 different streams, and each will be responsible for different parts of the care system, whether that's primary care, hospitals, long-term care, mental health, and addictions are sort of the 4 pillars here. So it's not super clear, I would say, what that's going to look like on the ground for people attempting to access services. But there is this survey where people can give feedback on what they think of this proposal to sort of rejig the setup. And it's going to be interesting because the Alberta Pension Plan survey got quite a bit of flack. It asked some of these logistical questions, but never asked, for example, whether people thought an Alberta pension plan was a good idea. So I would expect we are going to hear a little bit of sort of public grumbling about what this survey looks like, what it's asking. And it'll be interesting to see what the responses are because, of course, this is very complicated, and I think people are understandably leery of any changes to the healthcare system if they feel like they might lose services or lose their doctor or something. So remains to be seen what will come of it, to what extent that's incorporated into this overhaul and all that fun stuff too.
Now, still with healthcare, Tyler, the UCP is looking into increasing the role of nurse practitioners to help really strengthen our healthcare system. What would the reforms potentially look like, and how would they be really beneficial for Albertans?
Well, the basic idea is that nurse practitioners are going to be able to open their own clinics and practice independently. So, instead potentially of having a GP as your family doctor, you might have a nurse practitioner as your sort of first point of contact with the healthcare system. This is the case already in a lot of other jurisdictions, particularly the United States, but there are other provinces that have sort of expanded roles for NPs as well. And so that's the basic premise of how it's going to improve things. If there's a doctor shortage, if there's tons of Albertans who can't get a family doctor, well, maybe these nurses who have, sort of graduate level education, the government says they can do about 80% of what a family doctor can do. Maybe you'll get one of those and that'll be sort of good enough as a first point of contact. It is likely to be a little bit controversial, I think. It is controversial in other jurisdictions. Nurse practitioners do have a little bit less training than doctors. They don't have sort of the full suite of training and skills that doctors do. So I would expect to hear a little bit about that. But, I think for people who are struggling to find a first point of contact with the medical system and are instead going to walk-in clinics or emergency when something happens, I think a lot of people are going to quite like this.
Tyler, many people would agree that Alberta right now is a two-party province. You got the UCP and the NDP, kind of like down in the States with the Republicans and the Democratic Party. Now, as we saw in the last provincial election, none of the other parties, including the Alberta Party or the Liberals, made much of a dent. Now, Barry Morishita, the former Brooks mayor, stepped down as leader of the centrist Alberta Party. He says there really is a need for his party, but you know what? Not a lot of money to support it.
Yeah, centrist parties, I think, really struggle. It's really hard to get fired up about moderate ideas. It's sort of like being a really really enthusiastic member of the United Church. It's a tough sell, I think, for some people. My parents were United Church people, so no disrespect intended towards the United Church folks out there. But they really, centrist parties everywhere really struggle to get a whole lot of enthusiasm for their ideas. But the people who are involved are obviously very, very committed, and they believe that there's sort of a middle path to progress. But Barry Morishita did say, look, this needs money, this needs volunteers, and whether or not that's going to be forthcoming is really tough to say. If you look at the sort of numbers from the election in May, a lot of the ground that the NDP made up in terms of vote count probably came from former Alberta Party voters. So a lot of the sort of centrist voters have now just sort of coalesced around the New Democrats, which has really sort of gutted the Alberta Party's sort of historic voter base, I think. So it's going to be tough to rebuild that, I think, and whoever takes that on is going to have a tough path. The Alberta Liberals, for example, they struggle to even find a leader.
After the break, the rift between Ottawa and Alberta. What's the story behind this historic animosity? What is the backstory on the division, or maybe even the animosity between Alberta and Ottawa? Well, David Leese, host of Return to Reason's Leaders on the Frontier, sat down with Dennis Modry, founder of the Alberta Prosperity Project, to discover the historical roots of that tension. Take a look.
If we look at the history of the founding of this country, if we think of the British North America Act, we know that in 1867, a family of British colonies in the northern part of our continent got together through the genius of so many others, including Sir John A. Macdonald, and said, wow, we could work together as a particular type of federation. And they worked together as co-founders with the provinces equal to each other, working together to create a federal government that they thought they could serve themselves better and create a new country, Canada. So would you say it's important to remember that history, and how does that inform your vision about how we need to go about our business today?
That is important, and I think the original concept of a federation with provinces having the autonomy to develop to the extent that they wish to develop and to have their self-determination was the right concept. Mm-hmm. But it didn't work that way, and it didn't work that way by design. And this is what's important to understand. I'm going to show you hold up a book. Can you see this?
I sure can.
This is a book about Clifford Sifton. Now, why is it relevant? Because Clifford Sifton was the Minister of the Interior in the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who was responsible for bringing Alberta and Saskatchewan into Confederation in September 1, 1905. But it's what he said in a speech in Winnipeg in 1904, which is referenced on page 95 of this book. The entire statement that he said is important to understand, because when you understand it, you'll understand why Alberta has been treated the way it has been treated, and why we started as a colony and we continue to be a colony to serve the interests of the East. And it's over time to fix that. But here's what
Alberta, you'd say that Alberta is like a colony of the rest of the country?
Has been treated as a colony of the East. And I'll tell you why. Well, I already gave you a clue. We've given $700 billion since 1965.
Yeah,
we're overtaxed. Like I said, we get taxed at $60 billion a year. We get back 27. So here's the point. This is what Clifford Sifton said in 1904. And when you understand how prescient this comment is that he made, you'll understand why Alberta is in the dilemma that it is right now. So what he said in 1904 was this: we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire. Now, Canadian patriots in 1904 are the people that are living in the regions of Ontario and Quebec, because Alberta and Saskatchewan were not hadn't joined Canada yet. So we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies is Alberta's wealth, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to our prosperity, not the prosperity of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Now, that's important to understand because that is the pervading perspective that the Laurentian elites still have about Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Wow.
Now, it's important to understand one other point, and that's the national energy policy. And the national energy policy was instituted in 1980. But prior to that, Alberta was becoming the center of economic power in Canada. Massive immigration was occurring from elsewhere in Canada to Alberta, and from elsewhere in the world to Alberta. All 5 major banks were moving their head offices to Calgary, and one did. But what was happening in Alberta at that time was, and by the way, that was occurring because of our hydrocarbon industry, basically liquid gold, if you will. But what was happening in Alberta collided with what was happening in Quebec with the Quebec secessionist movement. So Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Marc Lalonde and the financial elites from Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal came up with a brilliant plan. That was the national energy policy.
Up next, we finally see some action on a 50-year discussion to twin Alberta's Crow's Nest Highway. But first, a quick break. Highway 3 in southern Alberta, dubbed the Crow's Nest Highway, is part of the National Highway Systems of Canada, and anyone who's traveled it would have noticed only portions of it are divided. Plans for twinning Highway 3 have been discussed for nearly 50 years, and now it looks like the ball will finally get rolling in the new year with Phase 1 between Taber and Burdett, Alberta. Earlier this week, I was joined by Coaldale Town Councillor Bill Chapman, who is also the president of the Highway 3 Twinning Development Association. He believes there are not only safety benefits to twinning the highway, but also tourism, recreational, and economic benefits. Take a look.
Yes, and as a growing province, we do know that every one of our communities is growing. So the impact of having this highway certainly will be the centerpiece to all of the economic activities that will occur and all the economic growth that is going to take place over the next 10 years. And of course, with the agri-food corridor growing, we're going to see a number of mega projects coming up over the next number of years that really will impact all sorts of service levels in Alberta. And of course, Highway 3 will become the cornerstone to all of these needs in southern Alberta.
Are you getting any pushback from businesses on who might, businesses that might possibly miss out on potential drive-through business?
I don't think so. I would like to speak for the town of Coaldale, and of course, back in the 50s, the Ministry of Transportation talked about routing highways or major highways around municipalities, mainly for economic and safety reasons, safety and efficiency reasons.
Yeah, 100%.
So that was important to note because Coaldale went through those conversations back in the 50s and again in the 1970s when they actually went to work to twin the highway around Coaldale. And if you remember, the old Highway 3 did go right through downtown Coaldale. And so if you were going to look at today's traffic, not only in numbers, but also in regards to the type of traffic that's occurring on Highway 3, downtown Coaldale would not be able to accommodate the amount and the size of traffic that's going through our community today. So if you look at history and then go to what we've encountered today, that the town of Coaldale has already been bypassed once. That being said, our community has grown 4 times that number since the 1970s. We're a community of over 9,000 population today. So if we translate that theory to other municipalities across our corridor, I don't doubt that there'll be any concerns about bypassing. I know that chambers of commerce are on side with Highway 3 twinning. They believe that this will be a major source of economic boost to the community.
So we know phase 1 is beginning in 2024. It'll take 3 years. How many phases are there in total, and how long will the whole project take? And when will the next phase begin, phase 2?
Yes, so there's a total of 8 phases, and so the government is proudly proclaiming a 10-year window for completing these phases. Some of that will be doable, and of course we know that some of the engineering can take place simultaneously. So some of these phases can go in sequence, or not just in A, B, C, D, and E order. We can certainly see some engineering, some stuff happening simultaneously.
And then, Bill, just before we go here, are there any final thoughts on this the Highway 3 twinning project?
Absolutely. We want to ensure that our association is still on board with ensuring that several components to the project be done and done right. Number 1 would being, of course, rest stops. Number 2, being animal crossings. And number 3 is really what we want to ensure is that there are an adequate number of entrances into our communities where the highway might be bypassed. So those are serious considerations and concerns from the municipalities that have been concerned about bypassing the community.
With Christmas just around the corner, we share some of the festive activities happening in and around Lethbridge. That is after the break. Keep it right here. Welcome back. An annual tradition has begun once again in Lethbridge, but it's not just for Christmas. It's the Nika Yuko Japanese Gardens Winter Light Festival. Organizers say they installed more than 170,000 lights this year, including 3 lit tunnels throughout the garden. They will also have a few other light displays and some Japanese lanterns. Last year, the Winter Light Festival brought in around 31,000 visitors, and organizers are hoping to top that number this year. The festival will run throughout the month of December from Thursday to Sunday. In January, it will run Thursday through Saturday, and in February, only on Fridays and Saturdays. Well, 'tis the time of year for giving, and for those who are less fortunate, a number of charities are working to make Christmas merry, especially for the kids. My City Cares Shop of Wonders is one of those initiatives. BCN's Naveen Day has the details.
Shop of Wonders is an annual Christmas program put on by My City Care. It is aimed at families that have challenges buying Christmas gifts for their children. Parents can come in and shop for their children for free. Tanya Lister, the program and volunteer coordinator, says the popularity of her organization's initiative grows year by year.
This is My City Care's 8th year of running Shop of Wonders program, and especially for the last few years, each year we've seen the program grow, but the last few years there has been a definite higher growth in this Shop of Wonders program. Last year, we had about just over 1,600 children come through our program. This year so far already, in this first week and a bit, we've already had just over 500 children come through the program. We have another 1,300 registered, and so we're definitely expecting to have surpassed that of what we had last year.
Lister adds, the families are grateful that they can get gifts for their little ones.
This year already we've had a lot of families come through, and there's just a lot of gratitude to be able to have an opportunity to be able to give their kids the Christmas that they wanted to. And that's where we offer to just step in and come alongside families to help them to do that. When they come to the Shop of Wonders, they get to walk around and choose the toys for each one of their children, and it's just a space that we can that we can offer just some dignity and love to them as they come through our space.
Well, we've been blessed with higher than normal temperatures here in southern Alberta, but eventually the weather outside will get frightful as we near the Christmas season. And if you're looking to purchase a fireplace this year, it's recommended to get it professionally installed. That's according to Troy Hicks, the fire prevention officer with Lethbridge Fire and EMS.
Before you even go up purchasing one is, I know there's a couple companies and businesses here in the city that install these fireplaces, and they will do a free quote. They will come to your home. They'll measure the area where you want to put it. They will let you know anything that has to happen to have these installed properly. So I really recommend getting that because you want to make sure that, one, you have the space, you have the room to have a fireplace in your home safely. Two, when you do go buy it, after having that done, have the experts install them because there is a lot of fire code requirements and building code requirements that in order to have these put in.
Last weekend, crews from 4 fire stations responded to a structure fire on West Side Drive. The cause of the fire was due to a homemade self-installed wood-burning fireplace. A new partnership between the University of Lethbridge and Australia's Bond University will result in dual degrees for Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Management students. The dual program agreement would have Lethbridge students study for 2 years at home and 2 years in Australia. It would be followed by a 5th year at home where they would graduate with 2 undergraduate degrees, including a Bachelor of Law from Bond University. Catherine Atkins, Associate Dean for External Engagement International for the Faculty of Law at Bond University, explains why it's beneficial for students to complete their education on opposite sides of the globe.
I think that diversity is really the key, and I often say to law students, when you graduate and apply for your first job, everybody is going to have one thing in common, and that's a law degree. So what do you have that sets you apart? And I think to be able to show that you have actually had the resilience to study a law degree overseas makes a huge impact on your resume. And I think also just in terms of the personal benefit that we all can have from studying at 2 different institutions.
The University of Lethbridge is about to receive funding of nearly $700,000 for agriculture research. The donation came from Results-Driven Agriculture Research, or RDAR, and will help boost the research of 3 scientists at the university. After the break, we delve into the economic outlook for southern Alberta, especially with Christmas just around the